What if the Bolsheviks lost the Russian Civil War against the Whites? This is an idea that a few have done before, but today I will be giving it a go and try and speculate how the Whites could have beaten the Bolsheviks and what the consequences could be. So, in our timeline, the Bolsheviks came to power in the October Revolution in 1917. When they stormed the Winter Palace and replaced the provisional government that had taken over after Tsar Nicholas had abdicated the throne. This caused a civil war in Russia against the Bolsheviks known as the Reds and the Whites, that were a load of different ideological groups that all had one thing in common: they hated the Bolsheviks. Quite a lot of them wanted the Tsar back, others had similar thoughts and had way more radical beliefs on what should be. Because of this they were very ununified and even attacked each other. So, in this timeline the White Army would have to be unified under one command structure. So, let's say that all the groups in the White Army agreed to settle their differences and fight the Bolsheviks. Now just this would drastically change the effectiveness of the White Army. But this in my opinion would not, on its own, make the Whites win the Russian Civil War. Because the Bolsheviks held all the industrial and high population areas in Russia, unlike the Whites that had all the low industrial areas in Russia. Though this was remedied by troops and aid from Japan, US and more countries in the war against the Central Powers, hoping to restart the Eastern Front against Germany, but slowly stopped after Germany surrendered in 1918. After this the White Army slowly declined until its defeat in 1923. So, in this timeline the Whites would have to make significant gains before 1918 when WW1 ends, capturing key cities and railway lines to boost their industrial capacity and limit the movement of the Red Army. This will give the White Army the best chance at winning the war after the foreign troops leave and aid runs out after WW1 ends. From this point the White Army would want to end the war quick, as they do have more industrial capacity and manpower than in our timeline, but the Red Army still outnumber them in manpower and industrial capacity. What will slowly tip the scales back in the Reds' army's favor? So, in the summer of 1919 the White Army would launch a new offensive that would attempt to try and break through the Red Army's lines and finally end the war before the Red Army got too strong. This offensive was successful and would pave the way for significant advances towards Petrograd and Moscow. By the end of 1919 the White Army had taken Moscow and surrounded Petrograd. At this point the Red Army and the Bolshevik course would be over, with Petrograd surrounded and all other major cities that the Red Army held taken by the might of the White Army. The Red Army might try and do a last stand in Petrograd but would be easily overpowered by the White Army, or would surrender to them. The remaining Bolshevik leaders like Lenin would flee into neighboring Finland or stay and face their fate. After the Red Army surrendered to the Whites or were destroyed by them, the Civil War would come to an end, with a White victory. After this the Whites would have tried to put together some form of government. But with no unifying goal to hold them together, the many groups of the White Army would probably split off and would start another civil war. Now if the Whites had captured the former Tsar Nicholas and his family before the Reds brutally killed them as they advanced on the city they were being held, this could provide a figurehead for the White Army and stop the White Army from splitting up, or at least to a degree. Now let's say this is what happened and Tsar Nicholas or a relative of him took up the throne of Russia and became a figurehead for the Whites to rally around to form a functional government. I can see this government as a constitutional monarchy where the Tsar gives his power to the state and just acts like a figurehead or with limited power. I can see them doing this mainly because the monarchy wasn't the most popular with the general population of Russia, especially Tsar Nicholas, who had sent many Russians to die in WW1 against Germany for a war that many Russians thought did not involve them, among other things. With all this, Russia would emerge from the early 20th century a shattered and divided state, losing many of its former lands that had broken free from them in the Civil War, like Ukraine, Poland, Finland, Estonia, to name some. I can see the new reformed Russian state try and reincorporate its former lands back into itself by force, likely by attacking Ukraine first, like in our timeline where the Bolsheviks attacked and took over Ukraine in 1919. Apart from this, I can't see the newly formed Russian state reincorporating any more of its former land apart from maybe the Baltic states, but that is about it. With this, I can see the new Russian state being plagued with much instability throughout the 20th century, but could survive if under the correct leadership. With that note, thanks for watching and please give me video suggestions in the comments.